What advice would you give to your 19-year-old self stepping off the plane, arriving in Japan for the first time? You don't have to drink. It's okay. You don't have to don't do the beer thing. Don't do the alcohol thing. Just say no. And then the other thing would have been like, hey, you can walk from Tokyo to Kyoto and there's these incredible routes. Like that was just not on the radar at all. I don't talk about it a lot because I don't think people should do it. It's actually really dangerous. It shocks me that it's allowed to happen to a certain degree. I mean...
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, sitting here today with Craig Mott. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You're a writer and photographer based out of Kamakura near Tokyo. You've been here in Japan for quite a while and you've written these very beautiful books, which we have today with us, Kisa by Kisa, Things Become Other Things and Other Things, as well as other books, which we don't have here today. All of those books have your extensive walking experience across Japan in common, and you've got some fascinating stories to share there. Before we dive into those, I'm curious about what brought you here in the first place.
So I came when I was 19, and it's sort of a strange reason. Why would you pick Japan? I come from this sort of post-industrial, small-ish American town where, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there was lots of economic opportunity, and like my grandparents, were able to work at the factory and they had like a good life, they could buy their house and all this stuff. And then, in America, as is the story across so much of the country, all the industrial stuff started to disappear. The jobs started to disappear. So my town as well lost a lot of jobs and a lot of work. And the 80s and 90s, things kind of began to fall and fall and fall. And now it's even in a worse place from what I've heard. I haven't been back in quite a while. But drugs creeping in, violence, things like that. And so I think I didn't really understand this until a couple of years ago, but I think as a kid and as a teenager, internalizing this kind of chaos and this kind of this sort of brokenness of things in the context of the richest country in the world felt to me really bizarre. And I think something inside me said, well, if this country can't take care of a town, then how can I trust the country to take care of me? And so that was sort of what drove me to want to just go abroad in general. And Japan would be kind of a strange, out of left field choice. But again, like a kid of the 80s, Nintendo was I would say, you talk about soft power, right? It's like Korea has a lot of soft power right now, like Korean K-pop and K-dramas and, stuff like, what's the TV show where everyone's calling
Squid
each other.
Game. I just finished watching it actually 2 days ago, I think.
So it's like soft power is a real thing, right? And Japan had a tremendous amount of soft power in the 80s. I mean, they have more now even, but this is like pre-internet. And obviously Nintendo was probably the biggest outreach of that soft power. And for me, as a kid in a place that didn't have much, we didn't have much money, we didn't have many opportunities. Nintendo and kind of the escape of video games was a big part of it. And, on the games it says made in Japan. And so that was my first contact with, I'd say, Japan itself. And that seeded in my mind as a little kid, oh, this place exists. And then when I was 19, sort of looking at opportunities or options, university in Japan was just so inexpensive compared to America. It was easy to get a scholarship and do a homestay and all that stuff. So I thought, be quite fun to go do that.
When was a time when you decided to transform this idea into action and actually went out to apply and decided, oh, today I'm doing this?
Yeah, so I was the first person in my family to go to university, and I didn't really know what I was doing. No one was guiding me, so I kind of ended up in a place I didn't like. And one of the positives of the place I ended up in, which is, fundamentally, it's a very good school. It's a super well-respected school, the first school I went to. But they had a language requirement, and I had done Spanish all through high school, and I was not good at it. And so I thought, okay, let me do Japanese. I had this experience when I was 13 or 14. My family had, I was raised by my mom, a single mother, and my grandparents. And by the time I was 14, my mom was working as a teacher, and my grandfather was still working probably, or had just retired and was getting a really good pension. And so we had kind of enough money to go take a big summer trip. And we went to Hawaii, and which is really far.
It is quite far out there in the Pacific. Yeah,
it's insane when you think about it. Like, why didn't we go to Paris or London? It's like that's just not on the radar. Hawaii is still quote unquote America. It's easy, yada yada yada. And Waikiki in 1993-94 was essentially Tokyo in the tropics. It was just 100% Japanese people everywhere. It was crazy. And I played golf. In America, golf is super cheap. Public courses, you can go play 18 holes for $5.
Really?
Yeah. So I would, from a very young age, my dad, who basically didn't really teach me anything except for a little bit of golf, he would take me to the public courses. We'd do 18 holes with like wooden clubs, and like we'd basically just be stealing balls from the forest and stuff. And so in Hawaii, I was like, all right, I want to go play golf. And I was 14. I went to the course. It was like $50 instead of $5. And they wouldn't let me play alone, so they teamed me up with 2 Japanese businessmen. And
as a 14-year-old kid.
As a 14-year-old kid. And these guys were like, "Are you married?" I was just, who are these people? Like, they barely spoke English. And they were just asking me these ridiculous questions. And they were so like patient. And I was a good golfer, so it's not like they were waiting for me to play or whatever. But like, they were super patient, super accepting of the fact that like these 2 businessmen had to like take this 14-year-old kid on, but they apparently thought I was like 25 or 30. And one of them had a hat on that said WHOOF, and then underneath it arted, which is like, if you read it fast, it says who farted. And I was like, do you know what this means? And it's like, no, what does it mean? So I had to explain like what a fart was and this. Anyway, it was such an interesting, it was like my first real experience with a truly other culture person, universe, Asia in particular. In my town, there was a lot of immigrants. So we had Laotian immigrants and Vietnamese immigrants and Cambodian immigrants. And, I'd go to their houses and hang out. And it was sort of like, almost like visiting another country. They're all first generation. But there's something about, first generation and sort of like blue collar. And there's something about these Japanese salarymen playing golf. And these people who were in this elevated position, just being so sort of like childlike with their bizarrety and wonder. And I just thought that was really fascinating. And I think that also seeded a little more interest to go see what Japan was all about.
So when the time came, you actually went not just Hawaii, which was a Tokyo in the tropics, but actual Japan.
Yeah.
Do you remember the day you actually first set foot here?
Yeah, I remember I got into Narita, and then I took the Narita Express to Tokyo. And I thought Tokyo Station was Tokyo. I thought that was like all of Tokyo was just Tokyo Station. And my homestay was in Hatagaya, which now is a really cool kind of hip area, but 25 years ago was strangely very similar to like kind of where it came from. Very blue collar. There are actually a lot of sort of homeless, and there's still a lot of sentos around, and active, and people didn't have baths and stuff in their homes. Now it's like, Kokyu Manshon and stuff like that. But I got off at Tokyo Station, and I remember being like, asking someone on the platform, where's Hatagaya? And they're like, that's like 40 minutes away on train. So they took me all the way to Shinjuku, which was, again, this like, I don't know if you would have this experience today because Japan is so inundated with travelers now. I think one of the things you lose with overtourism is the ability for the locals to have yoyu, the space in the heart, to help someone out kind of unconditionally, in this kind of from this place of true, desire to help. And this person did. They took me all the way to Shinjuku Station from Tokyo, and it was like crazy to have someone just like immediately a stranger be so giving and full of trust. And it was a really nice intro experience.
It occasionally still happens. It happened to me once when I first came to Japan 10 years ago. Same experience at the train station, not sure where to go and which line to take. These experiences kind of stay with you.
Yeah.
That a complete stranger just goes out of their way to just help you out and send you on your way.
Yeah.
So you're 19, you arrive here, and then you end up at a homestay.
Yeah.
Did you at the time think about this as a long-term thing, or were you just like, oh, I'll just come here for my university year? And
yeah, no, I just thought it was like kind of a gap year, and then I was going to go back to the US. I'd kind of, my trick for getting out of my town was to start programming. I started like learning how to program. I was always into books and novels and wanting to write, but I also knew that wasn't an easy way to get out of my town, whereas technical knowledge was kind of a turbo boost. And so my plan was to go to California after that year in Japan and kind of work and do design work and be in the industry there. But the bubble burst. And so I ended up going back to university in the States, getting a degree, and then immediately just coming back to Waseda to do post-grad. But again, that was also more, that first year, I think, fulfilled so many hopes I'd had for college. So I really wanted college to be multicultural, and I wanted it to be international. And Waseda was that. It was kind of amazing, actually. It was like so many countries, like, you know, the students were so many countries, were so well read. It was just a really wonderful group to be with, and I think I was hungry for that. And then I'm a musician as well, and so I started playing with Japanese musicians, and so immediately got kind of plugged into that world. And it was all just a lot of fun. And after that year, I didn't want to leave, and I was like, let me get back as quickly as possible. So I came back the summer after to do an internship at a magazine, and then the summer after I moved back to go back to grad school, and then I never basically left after that.
Never left.
I was able to get an artist visa. And
that's rare.
That was interesting. Well, again, I think back then, this is like 23 years ago, the number of applicants per year was very small.
Probably still is.
Probably still is. My degree is in fine arts and computer science. And so I have a fine arts degree, and I was doing exhibitions, and we just kind of like submitted the application saying like, look, here's my portfolio. And it was just like a bunch of naked people in tubs full of like milk and stuff. I mean, it was like very
photography.
Yeah, project? Photography portfolio. So it was very like, undergrad photography work, like naked people and milk and bathtubs and stuff. And but they apparently thought it was enough to give me an artist visa. And then once you have the artist visa, it's sort of like almost like a golden visa, because you can do anything. You don't need to have a sponsor. You can do as much work as you want. You just have to fulfill certain income requirements, which were like, I think it was literally like yakugojuman nenshu or something like that. It was very low.
That's like $1,000 per year, per month ish at the time, right?
Yeah. About $1,000 a month is what you kind of had to make to fulfill those goals. And I was able to keep the artist visa basically for 12 years until I switched to permanent resident.
You still need to make this minimum requirement. Did you have a plan for what you were doing here, professionally speaking?
Yeah, so when I came back to do grad school, I also was co-founding a publishing company. So immediately just sort of having this, I never wanted to work for a company. I'd always been kind of allergic to it. And having a fierce kind of independence was always really important to me. And I was lucky in the internship I did, the editor-in-chief of the magazine in Tokyo was like, hey, I want to do this publishing thing. Do you want to come on as the art director? And he was moving back to Seattle, and then I was moving to, he had spent like 20 years in Japan. He was moving with his family to Seattle, and I was moving to Tokyo for Waseda. And kind of during that first year, it was sort of preparatory work for getting the company going. And then when I graduated, we could just kind of be off to the races with our first book and stuff like that. So it was immediately just making books. I've just been doing this. My interest has been in physical books almost nonstop for about 25 years now.
Where did this interest for physical books come from, especially in an age where digital books are kind of little by little taking over, although there's a sort of comeback in the...
there's a big comeback. Yeah, no. Digital books are sort of died in a strange way, or they've calcified, ossified. I've just always loved books. I mean, always. That was the smallest dribble of culture that made it into my periphery as a kid. No culinary culture, no musical culture, no real literary culture, no film culture, but like a little bit of like through Stephen King, kind of like who was like just starting to touch on like the literary side of things. I remember reading The Dark Tower when I was in 4th grade and just being like really captivated, mesmerized. So books have always been on the radar. And then design has always been a key part of the work I've done. And when I was finishing undergrad in Philadelphia, I went to UPenn and did the fine art computer science program, the DMD program, digital media design program. When I was there, McSweeney's, this publisher out of California, was starting to really ascend. And McSweeney's was making the coolest, craziest, wackiest books. It was run by this guy, Dave Eggers, who had just published kind of a super hit memoir, hilarious, very meta. It was very late 90s, early 2000s energy. And so McSweeney's was this huge inspiration about what you could do with print. And so, I don't know, I was just really captivated by that. And there's something about like the immutability of printed things in books that feels really good. And, alongside that, of course, I'm doing all of this digital work as well. And I'm writing software and I'm doing data visualization stuff, and I'm getting artist residencies, like I went to the Benetton residency north of Venice in Italy. I did, doing these other things. But as I was doing all the digital stuff at the same time, I was making physical books. And it was always sort of like, if I really asked my heart, like which of these two things kind of feels the most fulfilling, it was always, the books were always winning. Like if I was at a party, it always felt, I don't know, really magical and good to say I worked in books and I made books and I was, making beautiful books, not just throwaway books.
And so after that internship at the magazine, you get to collaborate with the former director to start a publishing company, basically.
Yeah.
But based in Japan.
Yes. Well, it's Seattle, based in Seattle. The company was in Seattle, but I was sort of the Japan liaison.
Publishing, I feel, is very, maybe from my perspective, nationalized. I mean, you have a French publishing house for French books, and then English for English, and in Japan for Japanese books. So in your case, did you go into publishing Japanese books? What kind of books did you kind of
set out? Well, there wasn't really a big plan. The first book that we did was called Kuhaku, and it was a collection of short stories about Japan from people who had lived here long enough to sort of have insights into the country, but not so long enough to be jaded. So there's a whole, if you look at like old expats, that whole universe of expats, there's kind of a jadedness that can set in. Anyway, so it was that kuhaku space of kind of between super fresh-eyed and not jaded. And that was kind of the only plan for the company. But it just turned out that first book, the design of it went really well. We did 2-color foil stamp, 2-color silk screen, printed in Iceland at this printer called Odie, just randomly. They were the only printer that would get back to us. And that was the one that McSweeney's used. So it was kind of like we were sort of chasing them. And that book, the design came out so well, and Odie was so happy with it. They mailed copies of it around the world to designers that they loved. And so that put me on the map of all these mostly American and European designers, which was incredible. And it was, it was an English book with like illustrations and kind of, really well made and all that. And so that sort of opened up a bunch of doors for me in terms of connecting with the New York City design world, the London design world, kind of these broader publishing and design worlds. And that got us, because that book was so well made, we were able to get national distribution in the US through a distributor that normally only gives contracts to publishers with at least 10 books.
Wow.
So it was a series of really fortunate, unexpected events.
But if you go back to the beginning of that story, you start this publishing company and you have this one book that you want to bring out.
Yep.
The success of the company in that way relies a lot on you being able to publish this and people buying that book.
Yeah.
How do you decide, okay, we're going to go with this story. This story is worth putting out there and putting all this effort in there, and we will be able to pay our bills from it.
Yeah, no, there was no real calculation. It was really, I mean, in publishing, it is shockingly kind of fly by the seat of your pants for a lot of things. And we really couldn't see beyond this book. And so it was just sheer luck. The reality is that this book shouldn't probably have been as good as it was in the end. And then it should have just kind of ended there. And then we were doing a lot of other consulting. So we were doing like translation consulting and design consulting and stuff like that to kind of pay the bills and then enable the publishing to happen.
Publishing in Japan, to my understanding, is also kind of led by very large companies. And is it still the case? Did you feel like you had to go up against those, or did you have your little niche for?
No, 100% niche. And I've always kind of been in that indie press niche where it's like charge more, focus on the design, make a higher quality product. Publishing today is really interesting, in Japan, in that there are a lot of independent publishers. I'd almost say in some ways we're in a kind of a golden era of publishing, both in Japan and maybe even abroad, because it's easier than ever for smaller presses to get access to printers, which used to be difficult because they would, they had a lot of work and they didn't want to work with small companies. Now there's less work, and so they're more willing to kind of collaborate. And so actually the Japanese edition of Kisa by Kisa, which came out 6 months ago, basically December last in 2024, this is published by a small press in Morioka, which is a city I kind of had this unexpected connection to.
We may talk about this in a little bit.
Yeah, we should talk about Morioka. It's kind of an interesting example. But like this is a really cool little press that, he runs in, Hayasaka-san runs this like independent bookstore in Morioka, publishes like maybe 4 or 5 books a year. And it's this community hub. And, he sells a lot online. it's all in Japanese, so it's mainly just Japan buyers. But he's able to run a really sustainable business from this. And I think that's amazing. And that's not something you could have done as easily, say, 20 years ago. Because the internet infrastructure wasn't there, and then the shipping infrastructure wasn't quite as accessible either.
So these new infrastructures are enabling these local businesses to kind of collaborate to bring out these indie publications.
Yeah, indie publications. And also, I mean, they're kind of, layering several things. It's like the community of the space, the coolness of the space. So you get a lot of people that go because of like Instagram or whatever, and they just want they love the bookstore. But, it's a very like sacred space. There's like no photos allowed, and like no one's really talking, and it's like super quiet. Even when this book came out, we tried to record an interview with like the biggest TV station up in Iwate. And, even though this was the book that he published, like it was really hard for us to get even like 10 minutes in the shop. Cause he's like, oh no, hokano kyakusan ni meiwaku. He's like so committed to this. Like, we're like, Hayasaka-san, this is like really important, send in. So it's like, let's do this. And he's like, oh, okay, I guess so. But please, keep it less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Sort of amazing, that commitment to sacred spaces. So I think that's really interesting and new and special, and probably something that even 10 years ago didn't exist.
For your first book, you mentioned the company was based in Seattle. You were like the Tokyo office, and then you worked with this printer based out of Iceland.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I imagine you do a lot also within Japan.
Yeah, everything's in Japan.
How does it work? Like, who does what, and how many people are involved into the publication of a book? Let's say this one, for example.
Well, maybe it's easier to talk about one of these guys, because this is sort of not one I was really involved with. So
this is the Japanese version of Kisa by Kisa, and here we have the English version, but it's a special print.
They're all special prints, but I think this is the third edition, and so we do silkscreen covers. This cover's drawn by Luis Mendo, who's a longtime Japan resident. You should have him on the show. He's super interesting, Spanish illustrator, and really wonderful guy. And I, because I've been working and printing in Japan for close to 20 plus years now, I have relationships with printers and binders. And so this book I did when COVID hit. So this is 2020. I have a membership program that basically I've been writing newsletters for 15, 16 years. And 6.5 years ago, I started a membership program. If you wanted to support my work, you could. And so that kicked off. And then COVID hit, March 2020. Everything ground to a halt. And I actually had 11 international trips planned for the rest of that year, and they all instantly done.
Wow.
And I really needed that. Actually, I needed someone to put the brakes on it. And so the buyers put the brakes on it. And I was left with, okay, now what do I do? And so I had just done my first huge walk, which was the Nakasendo. I walked from Kamakura to Tokyo, and then Tokyo to Kyoto over about 30 days or so. And I had written a bunch about the Kisaten along the way. And there was no real plan. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go to Kisaten every day. And just like 3 or 4 days into it, I realized, oh, okay, every day I'm probably going to hit a Kisaten, because the more and more you get into the countryside, the more you realize, you hear these words, shochika mondai and, koreika shakai and stuff like that. And it's like, aging society and low birth rate and stuff. But what does that really mean? Because you live in Osaka, you live in Tokyo, there's lots of kids, there's lots of activity, the population's growing. It doesn't feel like things are contracting. Mm-hmm. But you go to the countryside, immediately it's obvious. And so the old Nakasendo route, which is, one of these old sort of daimyo sort of commuting routes back during, the shogunate in the Edo period, where you had to do sankin kotai back and forth from your home to Edo and to pay homage to the shogun.
Pilgrimage.
Yeah. But, so not really a pilgrimage, but like it was a political demand by the shogun. It basically was a way to like cost the daimyo money and to keep their power somewhat restricted. But so these highways were built, the Nakasendo and the Tokaido. And I did this first big walk. And there are parts of the Nakasendo, like people say, oh, I walked the Nakasendo. And 99.9% of the time they went to Magome and Sumago, and they walked for like 5 hours between them.
So they are two old post towns,
yeah.
A little bit in the mountains, I believe.
They're in Nagano, sort of on the border of Gifu, in this valley called the Kisoji. And it's a really beautiful area. I really love it. But they're sort of almost like little Disneyland post towns. Mm-hmm. Like they've been kept as they were Edo style. All the wires are underground and stuff like that. And so most people will say, "Oh yeah, well, I did Nakasendo. I walked for a day." Da, da. But I'm interested in the other 28 days where you're not walking through the Disneyland stuff, and that is you're walking through really post-industrial Japan or like true suburban Japan and small towns and villages, and then that's when you really feel what does depopulation mean, what does aging society mean, and you realize like a lot of these towns, the only thing they have left is a barber and a kisaten, which is sort of, kisaten's like a Japanese style cafe diner. And so I ended up going every day to these kisaten and eating pizza toast almost every day too. That was kind of the weird.
Which is on the illustration.
Right.
People can see in the back, there's a beautiful homage to the one and only pizza toast.
Yes, pizza toast. Actually, can I open to I think one of the best pizza toasts in the world is actually, it's not on the Nakasendo, ironically. It's on the road, almost on the Tokaido. It's on the way into Tokyo from Kamakura. But this is pizza toast at a cafe called Bugen in Ofuna. And they've been around for 40 plus years. And I just think I've eaten, 100 pizza toasts or whatever. And
I can imagine.
This is the best pizza toast. In fact, I just did a little thing with Uniqlo where we did a photo shoot there, and I wrote a little essay about kisaten for the Uniqlo magazine, Lifewear. Uniqlo does this magazine. They print 1.5 million copies of it.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's another scale. Okay.
We went. So yeah, this is this is published in editions of 1,000. Uniqlo does 1.5 million. But we did a nice little photo shoot at Bugen with that pizza toast. I'm in like a Uniqlo sweater or something, and then have this little essay about kisaten. But it was kind of funny to like tie that back together. So the other thing too is like you don't know where any of this is going to lead. None of this was planned. Making these books, leading to this one, because when I put this one out in August 2020, I did not think it was going to do as well as it did. I priced it at $100 a book, and then the thing I did was, if you were a member of my membership program, which costs $100 a year, you would get, for this one, I think it was like a $50 discount. So it was kind of like a thank you, like prepaying for allowing me to do this work. And I thought, okay, 1,000 copies, $100 a book. Knowing what I knew about publishing, I was like, okay, this will take 2 years to sell these. And we launched it and sold out in 2 days.
Wow.
And so that was a shock. So it was like instantly $100,000 of, and the other shock was the conversion rate to memberships. Was like, if you weren't a member already and you landed on the page, you saw that and you said, oh, okay, I could pay $100 for this, or I could pay $100 to become a member and then $50 more. So I could pay $150 for it. It turns out like 20-30% of everyone decided to do the $150 thing because they want to support me as a artist, writer, and get the book. So that was a big shock. And that kind of changed my thinking about basically my entire career and everything I've been doing since. And so then we did a reprint right away, sold those out. This is we just went into the 6th edition of this, which is Bananas for a $100 book.
How did you approach the printing and putting together this book for the first edition at the very beginning? So, I mean, kind of like with
McSweeney's and sort of chasing after them, the thing to do is to really just reach out to publishers whose work you respect and say, hey, can you intro me to your printer or whatever? And so I did that with the first edition of this. And then by the 3rd edition, basically there were some complicating things where it made sense to switch printers. And so then I ended up, through other friends, because this had done so well, getting connections to other printers and other binders. And then I've been working with that team now for the last basically 4.5 years on all my books, all my printing projects. Even the Japanese edition was printed with those folks.
So this book, which is very beautiful, bound as well, it's 2 different companies or 2 different teams that are, one kind of printing all the pages and 2 kind of assembling them. I don't know if assembling is the right word here, but it just like it's flat and it's very it's very easy. It's a whole experience to unpack those books and kind of feel them and go through them. It's not just about just reading the story. So I'm kind of curious how you decided on those specifics, on how you want this bound, on how you want to make this cover.
Well, I always from the beginning thought I wanted to do a series. So I wanted this to be a series of books. I don't know how long the series is. I have 5 more books I want to do, waiting for me to
be written.
Sit at home and do them. life has gotten really busy in the last 2 years. It's kind of unexpectedly.
I can imagine after these books are doing so well.
And so anyway, the idea was like series. And so COVID hit, and then I spent basically April, May, June setting a design language and template for what could be a series. And I wanted to also combine essentially like the spirit of John McPhee, who is this, incredible. He's still alive. I think he's like 100 years old or something. This amazing, probably the American narrative nonfiction writer, writing. He has a book called Oranges, where he just wrote about oranges, or, he writes about geology a lot. He wrote a beautiful book about Pine Barrens, New Jersey. I mean, just this gorgeous, gorgeous book. Phenomenal writer, incredible sort of felicity with language. The way he uses English is really inspiring, and just kind of this wholesomeness, like this goodness to him, and like the straightforwardness of telling the stories. So I was always inspired by folks like John McPhee, Annie Dillard. And then on the other side of it, you have like Stephen Shore, and other kind of photographers of that ilk. And I wanted to kind of mix narrative nonfiction with the photo book. And that was sort of the goal with these. And Kisa by Kisa was kind of the first attempt at that. And so that was kind of behind the design, coming up with a template where you could do photos, where the photos were respected and the text was kind of given space to breathe. And I really like the size. It's a B5 size.
Okay.
And I think it's, it's not unwieldy, but it does feel special. American hardcover, standard hardcover is kind of this size. And so you can sort of see, B5 is a little bit bigger than that. And what's really magical is when you do lay flat binding. So there's actually several companies that are involved with the production of any book, really. Lay flat binding just allows you to really, these things like sit open.
And you can actually just take time to enjoy the photo. You don't have to bend it open, to flatten the page.
And you could even leave it open, on a display or something, so you can kind of enjoy it as a work of art in and of itself. And then like giving space, between the photos and the text to breathe and all that. So that was, kind of really important to me. And the printer, oftentimes when you hire a printer, they sort of hire off on their own the silk screener, the binder, the packager, all these other people. So the printer is really only they're basically managing the project and doing the body block printing. And these are printed on Heidelberg presses in Nagano, and amazing, beautiful printing space. It's a company is about 120 years old or so. And then the binder is in Kagurazaka, and I had really strict requirements for the binding. I wanted, so you see with a standard hardcover, you get this like big overlap between the body block and the cover. If I take, or the hardcover. So if you take this off, you can kind of see there's about 2 or 3 millimeters there, and I wanted 1 millimeter. And and I also wanted, I don't like hardcovers, to be honest. I think paperbacks and soft covers are kind of more
hardcovers are nice for like coffee table books, but not for reading.
Yeah, and so, but I do like protecting it, and I like this this kind of, I've always loved these kind of midway points where you get a little bit of flex, so it feels comfortable in the hand. And what you're doing is you're taking these cover boards and you're just doing a thinner stock than you would with a hardcover, but thicker than you would with a paperback. And then when you cloth bind it and do the silk screening and all that, it creates this really robust kind of covering. But to get this 1 millimeter overhang perfectly done, you have to hand bind them all. And so the binder in Kagurazaka builds a hand jig for each of these books, and then basically hand does them all and then puts them in the press. So they're expensive for a reason. We have a lot of people involved, and I make sure that all the companies that are involved are treating their employees well, and that everyone's getting compensated properly and all that.
How long does it take for you to kind of, especially because logistically the book is going through multiple prefectures, to get them printed?
Not so long. I mean, from printing to in the warehouse, which is actually in Osaka, my warehouse that fulfills everything. Say maybe like 6 weeks maximum.
Okay.
So, this book came out, and then Things Become Other Things, the fine art edition came out, and then the Random House hardcover edition came out. And then this book, Other Thing, so talk about speed. So this is a photo book about the Kii Peninsula. So Things Become Other Things is kind of my memoir of walking the Kii Peninsula, where I did during COVID this 300 mile, 600, 500 kilometer walk. And talk about all that stuff. And then other thing is me going back. I actually went back in February this year. So if you want to talk about timelines, this was a really fast book. So I went back in February. I did 10 days. I've been walking the Key Peninsula by this point for 12, 13, 14, 15 years. So I have all these relationships I've built up. And I called all these inns. I called other friends. I said, hey, can you introduce me to fishermen, to dock workers, to Amasan, the pearl divers, all that stuff, and just set up this 10-day photo shoot, essentially. And went down there at the end of February, I shot this entire book on film using a Mamiya 7 II and Leica M6. Edited the photos, got the film developed, edited in March, laid out in March, got high-res scans of the images I want to use, laid those out. April, we got the final files to the printer. They printed and bound and packaged in April, and it was shipping by like May. It would have shipped earlier, but Golden Week set us back by a week, so it was shipping by like May 10th. So I shot it, let's say February 10th, and it was in readers' hands by May 10th. So you can go that fast.
That is pretty fast.
Which I think is pretty quick.
All of these books started from walking.
Yeah.
You mentioned Kisa by Kisa. The idea of going from Kisa 10 to Kisa 10 actually only emerged after you had started walking.
Yeah.
But why did you set off to walk from Kamakura to Kyoto?
It's a good question. I mean, I think I was looking for challenges and meaning on a really meta scale. I think that was fundamentally what was kind of driving that interest. I'd spent basically from the age 19 to I first started kind of walking. The big walk happened in 2019, but from basically age 19 to 34, I had sort of lived in Japan and I had not really engaged with the old roots. And so it was this friend, mentor, senpai, this guy named John McBride, who kind of opened up walking to me. He's 20 years older than me. He came on Monbusho when he was like 17. He went to Gaigodai University, everything, fully Japanese, writing his Sotsugo Ronbun in Japanese and all this. And he started walking them because of his Nihon Bungaku class. He was reading, Basho and reading Shanks Mare and stuff like that. And a lot of these old books, these old narratives took place on pilgrimage routes. So when he was 18, 19, 20, he started walking all of them himself. So he walked Nakasendo, he did, Okuno Hosomichi, he did the Hachiju Hachikacho Shikoku, he did all these things on his own. And basically when he was like 50-ish, he started to go back to them. And we had connected through the art world. There's this other book I did, Art Space Tokyo. And when he started to go visit the Kii Peninsula to look at Kumano Kodo, which had gotten World Heritage designation, the UNESCO designation, and kind of put it on people's maps again. And so John started going back there to plan out walking self-guided tours and walking tours. And he started inviting me and I started going, and it was just an incredible experience to go out. I knew nothing about any of these pilgrimage routes. I'd never heard of Kumano Kodo before. I'm like 33, 34. I'd never heard of any of this stuff before. I'd been to Koyasan when I was 30 by chance. But for the most part, this was all new. And something really hit me. I mean, watching John, who has this beautiful kind of imperial Japanese, ensorcel all of these farmers and country people, and just seeing people moved by the way he spoke to them and his knowledge of history and the physicality of it being rewarding. After a couple of years of walking with him, I felt like I could walk on my own maybe. And so I started walking on my own. And at the same time, I was kind of doing these ascetic practices. So I did a 10-day Vipassana retreat in outside of Kyoto, which was incredible. That was my first real kind of like ascetic activity.
It's an interesting experience, a Vipassana retreat.
Have you done?
I've done 3 weeks in a monastery in Myanmar.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A few years back, and it's difficult.
It's hard, yeah. So this was just 10 days. But it felt really good. I mean, I felt like I'd scaled Mount Everest by the end of it. It felt really, really exciting. And then that control over attention, thinking about attention, which has led into so much of this other work. Thinking about attention, thinking about what it means to control that, to move it, to like have it be a physical thing. And then I got connected with Yamabushi, so mountain asceticism up in Yamagata. John was leading tours up there, and he became best friends with the head of this Yamabushi temple sect. And he started getting invited to do Yamabushi training, and he started doing it. And then I got invited, and I did it once. That was enough for me. It was like, I don't talk about it a lot because I don't think people should do it. It's actually really dangerous. And it shocks me that it's allowed to happen to a certain degree. I mean, have you ever done it?
No, I have never done it, but we talked to Tim Bunting.
Okay, sure. Yeah. He's like, mega Yamagata Yamabushi boy.
But he wasn't allowed to kind of say about what's actually happening there. So I'll take your word for it, but it's interesting.
I mean, some of the stuff that is talked about, like you just do, you just do things like you're essentially fasting, you're not sleeping a lot. It takes place in August, so it's
very hot,
so disgusting, and you're just wearing these heavy cotton robes. People are passing out, like literally passing out. And we're doing these huge climbs in the mountains, and there are men aged 20 to 90 that are participating. And like guys are passing out, and there's like you eat really fast, and so everyone eats too fast, and sometimes people choke. There's some other activities that involve physical stuff, and people break their clavicles, or like it's like there's a lot of opportunity for injury, if not death. It's just amazing to kind of see that, and especially when you think about, like, I think 50 or 60 years ago, there were only about maybe 10 people a year that were doing it. And now it's so popular again. I think this speaks to the contemporary condition too, like this desire for ascetic practice to disconnect from digital stuff has a lot of folks going back to these places. And also that kind of fraternity element of it. I mean, it's like a boys club essentially. And there are guys who've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years. Every year they come back and they do it. And then the thing they really look forward to is the drinking with everyone when it's all done, which I don't know how they do it because you're so exhausted.
Probably have an empty stomach as well. And like, the alcohol just gets straight to you.
It's totally insane. I mean, it's really intense.
So for you, these practices were kind of all coming together in walking.
Yeah. In walking, to me, it kind of felt like the best way to take what you learn from these things, these pushing through difficult emotions or feelings or uncomfortableness, discomfort. And also I was looking for a reason to be in Japan, to be honest. Like I didn't want to work for a Japanese company. I had permanent residency. So I was not, I was not bound by employment. I could make enough money on my own, just doing a little consulting gig here or there that it was easily covering, whatever, like, cost of living. But I was looking for like a bigger point of being here. I spent a big part of my life studying the language, and yet, I didn't have this explicit thing to do. And I think when I found the walking with John and saw what he was kind of uncovering, and also the fact that it could be done alone, and it could be this truly solo endeavor, and you could sort of apply it to almost any geography. And there's something about the anthropological component of it, the ethnographic component of it, the human geography component of it that just really spoke to me. It's like, okay, this is special and kind of interesting. And with language skills, you can kind of unlock another layer to it. And you take the asceticism and you layer that on top of it. And then you add, eventually, after the first walk, I added an incredible writing and photography component to it. And so it just sort of brought everything together for me. That purpose, finding more meaning to being here, because I'm adopted, and so there's a sense of not really having a home anywhere, and I still don't feel like Japan is home. It's a place I know better than anywhere else in the world. Tokyo's a city I know better than anywhere else in the world times 1 billion. But as an adopted person, you always feel apart from it all, and I think Japan, in some ways, is comforting to an adoptee because you're never going to be part of it. And anyway, finding. I guess I'm taking up this carbon, I'm creating waste. It's like, can there be more purpose to me being here aside from just, doing some consulting projects or whatever and writing little essays every now and then. And the walking kind of gave a framework to that.
So you walk, you have that framework, but eventually you want to turn those experiences and your thoughts and what you see into words, capture them on cameras. And the books kind of started coming together.
Yeah.
The books are very poetic. They are very self-reflective. And especially things become other things. You kind of mix your past and present in a way.
Mm-hmm.
How did you kind of get to make all those parallels, which are very interesting? You talk a lot about your childhood as well, and your friend Brian.
Yeah.
And the moment you are experiencing in the present while walking, you connect it to something that happened in the past, or vice versa.
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting. How did that come to be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is the power of walking alone, right? And I can't do the work I do for these books if I'm with anyone else. It just doesn't work. I need to be alone, or the machinery doesn't kick into play. So the photography, the writing, all happens in those big stretches of silence, And so when I'm walking, my schedule is like I'll walk. This was like a 30-day walk. Kisa by Kisa was actually part of a 40+ day walk that I did, and so day after day after day, I'm walking 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 kilometers on some days, carrying my pack, talking to as many people as I can along the way, photographing, taking notes, dictating, like all day long. And then what I'll do is I'll run what I call a pop-up newsletter along with the walks. And so every day when I get to the inn, and my favorite place to stay is sort of a business hotel, because no one talks to me. And I could just get some stuff at the convenience, go to my hotel, put stuff in the laundry, in the washing machine, and then just get going working. And I'll do 3, 4, 5 hours of writing a night.
After having walked for the whole day?
Yeah, so 8 hours of walking, 9 hours of walking, and then 4 hours of editing photos, writing up the notes, editing the notes, putting together a photo essay newsletter, and then publishing that every night. And that has become sort of, I would say, my core aesthetic practice. And I've done that now for hundreds of days. And you do that day after day after day after day after day. And it builds up different muscles in you. It's like, you get to the end, you're exhausted. You're like, oh my God, I don't have anything in me. What could I possibly write? And then you sit down and you start to do the work without any excuses. You kind of turn everything else off. You have the internet off. You have everything else kind of blocked. And it turns out you can produce 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 words. And you edit the photos and things come together and you look at your notes and you go, oh yeah, there's this incredible quote. This guy said this one thing today, and that just kicks off all this thinking about life and reflecting back on, especially during COVID when everything was sort of so quiet, reflecting back on, your childhood and where you came from and things like that.
That's beautiful. And do you have any of those stories, any of those people you've encountered that kind of really stuck with you, where you, to this day, you kind of unshake the encounters you had on certain days walking?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many. For example, last year I was walking the Tokaido. So I've walked Tokaido twice. One time I did it in like 30 days, also during COVID. I did that when the Biden-Trump election was happening in 2020. Mm-hmm. And I had this rule where I was like, I'm not going to look at the news. When I walk, I have news turned off. I have social media turned off. And I said, okay, I'm not going to look I don't want to know what's going on. And everyone in America was losing their minds. Everyone's going crazy. And I said, okay, the walk started like a few days before the election. And I was like, some farmer in the middle of nowhere is going to yell to me, Biden won, or hey man, Trump got it. Can you believe it? That's what I expected. And I'm walking. The election happens. No one talks to me. And I was like, okay, this is really interesting. And finally, like 2 weeks after the election, I messaged a friend to say, hey, Sam, like who won? What's going on? And so anyway, that notion that sometimes I think when we're plugged in to the internet, that the whole world cares about these things. The volume of what's happening online on social media represents the life experience of everyone. I think is a misconstruction that we often make. And so pulling away from that, just as a whole, as an experience on that walk, was really quite powerful. But I walked the Tokaido again last year, and I wanted to do it at the Edo era pace. So Edo era walks would happen at 10 D a day.
It's like 4 kilometers.
Yeah, one ri is 4 kilometers. And so what the shogun did was along the Tokaido, the Nakasendo, you built these ichirizuka, which were these 1D mounds next to the road. So they'd be flanking the road. And they'd often have like a beautiful tree or something. It was like, it must have been incredible to have these markers every 4 kilometers. And the idea was it was basically the distance the average adult could walk in an hour.
Okay.
And so the goal was 10 D a day, so 40K a day, which is a lot. But I guess in 1820, everyone had strong legs and could walk a lot more easily. And I think there were more matsunamiki, so you had more shade, you had behind trees. The road was dirt, not asphalt. The temperatures were significantly lower than they are today. I mean, if you look at the historic data for temperatures, it's a clear.
I don't think I want to look at that. It's going to be depressing.
It's so depressing. Honestly, walking the Nakasendo or Tokaido in 1820 would have been incredible. I think it would have just been so beautiful. It would have been so vibrant. You'd have all these tea shops and sort of stalls, and every post town would have been this like kind of chaotic circus. So much life. And you're walking in waraji, so the straw sandals, which I think that plus the dirt road was actually not that bad for your joints, for your legs and all that. Much easier than sneakers and asphalt. So I think it was easier. Anyway, I tried to do it last year, doing 40K a day, and you do it in 16 days. And it's really, it's terrible. You're just like, oh my God, 40K a day for 16 days.
It's like a marathon a day.
A marathon a day with like a huge pack, and then every night you're riding. But along that, in the middle of, I walked it in May, and May has been getting hotter. It's like you think May is going to be okay, but it ends up being, you need like 4 liters of water a day. And I was in I think Shizuoka Prefecture. I was dying. It was so hot. And I was like, all right, let me go to a kisa. Let me just take a break. And I popped into this random kisa and I opened the door. It looked like it was closed. I opened the door and the owner was like standing barefoot on the counter, changing the light bulb. And I was like, this is amazing. Don't move. I'm like taking his photo of him doing that. And I just thought like, this is just so beautiful. I love the fact that like, he, in his mind, being barefoot on the counter was better than, maybe putting something on it and stepping on that or whatever. And so like, it's just kind of funny, all these cultural kind of expectations and norms colliding.
In that one moment
of opening the door. And so that was really beautiful. And they've had lots of other moments I read about in the Random House edition. So these 2 books are same name, but Random House edition is about double the length in terms of context. So it's more, because it's for a more broad audience. So it's more about where it came from. I talk about a story. John and I went to this snaku in Totsukawa Onsen, which is in kind of the middle of the Kii Peninsula. And we go in, we'd always kind of thought about going in, but it's kind of scary sometimes. Snaku.
You don't know what you're going to find in there.
You don't know what's going to be in there. But it was really cool looking. The design was amazing. Super Showa, like 1960s style. And we go in and it's like this little counter and there are like 5 seats at the bar and there are like 2 Japanese guys on one end, one guy on the other. And John sits down, I sit down, and then we're full. And the little guy at the end was like maybe 85, 90 years old. He was a logger, tiny little guy. And he and John are talking. And John just has this way of like seducing everybody. He's just such a lovely human. He's this Australian guy who just got this aura of kindness. Like he's like a Buddha.
Opens up everyone around.
Yeah. He's like a walking bodhisattva. And they're getting more and more intense. And then I look over and like the old guy's kind of like stroking his arm. It's like talking about the hair on John's arm, and the clock hits like 8:55 and the old guy stands up and he goes, I have to go home. His children, he has all these children that live nearby and they allow him to go out to this place and he lives alone. They allow him to come to the snaku and get drunk, but he has to call them by like 9 p.m., get home and call them. And it's 8:55. He stands up and he goes, I've never spoken to a foreigner before today. Or you're like, whoa, all right. And he's like, holy fourth. And he just goes like, I used to think they were ferocious, scary things. And he was pretty drunk. And he goes, but now I know that's not true. And he like leaned over and kissed John like on the forehead. And we were just like, what is going on? And he like waddled out. I was just like, it was just one of the most bizarre experiences I've had.
So that snack definitely had something unexpected behind the doors.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Kii Peninsula. It's a place you kind of keep going back to.
Yeah.
It has the famous Kumano Kodo, which is this ancient pilgrimage route. Also affiliated with the Santiago de Compostela.
Their
in
sister or sibling pilgrimage routes.
Why this area? Why going back to this one? Japan is full of these beautiful trails.
Yeah.
What draws you to this area?
Well, what I like, I'm not into nature walking. So
interesting.
Yeah, I don't have any desire to just be in the mountains, away from everything. I love villages. And again, that human geography, the anthropological and ethnographic component of the walking is really what draws me. And so maybe we can hold this up. The Kii Peninsula.
So just south of Osaka, actually, in Wakayama Prefecture,
exactly.
Mie, and a little bit of Nara.
Yep, exactly. And Kumano Kodo is by far and away the most famous thing probably here. And Ise Jingu Shrine probably as well are definitely the most famous aspects of it. And it's sort of infamous the movie The Cove. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
It's sort of a gonzo documentary about this town kind of on the south of the peninsula where they slaughter dolphins. Once a year, they have a dolphin slaughtering like matsuri.
Is this still happening today?
Kind of, sort of is still happening, I think. There's like, if you go to Kikatsura, you can eat dolphin. And there's like pens you can see in the bay of like them keeping the dolphins and stuff like that. So
okay,
it was sort of infamous 20 years ago for that documentary, but Issei Shrine and the Kumano Kodo are definitely the biggest contemporary things. And I went because of Koyasan, which is sort of in the middle of the peninsula. And Koyasan's incredible. Have you been to Koyasan? I mean, it really is a special place, a power spot. And so that was my first trip going there. And then I was like, wow, this is magical. And then John and I started doing these walks and I was like, wow, this is really special. And it just turns out, I mean, if you look at the roots, so when people say Kumano Kodo, like earlier you said you walked to Kumano Kodo, and like 99.9% of the time it's Nakahechi. So it's Tanabe to Hongu to Nachi, right? And then you go down to maybe Kikatsura and stay at like a nice hotel or something. But like that's 99% of it, when actually Kumano Kodo is like this spider web of roots. So it's Ohechi around the bottom of the peninsula. It's the Iseiji, kind of Issei Shrine down to Shingu. It's the Kumano Kaido, which connects Kumano City and Hongu. It's the Omine Okugake Michi, which goes up to Yoshino. It's the Kohechi, which goes up to Koyasan. So there are all these roots. And there's actually an entire part of the Kumano Kodo which starts in Osaka and goes all the way down.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So people would begin in Osaka and walk down the west coast and then kind of go inland. And the 88 Temples pilgrimage actually also begins on Koyasan. And you start by going to Kobadaishi's resting area, his meditation spot, requesting his kind of permission and protection. And then you hike down probably the Choishi Michi, and then you kind of walk out to the sea here, and then that's when you cross over and you start the 88 Temples. So there's a lot of routes that are kind of connected. There's the Issei Kaido, that's Yokkaichi down to Issei Shrine. So the peninsula is just filled with roots. So that's sort of why I started going back, because I would discover these other little pieces and I'd be like, oh, this is really cool. Like the Iseiji discovery was shocking to me. No one had ever talked about Iseiji. John never mentioned Iseiji. And I thought, oh, okay, let me try doing a little bit of it. John and I walked the Omine Okugake Michi. We got back to Hongu. And I was like, okay, let me walk down to Shingu and then I'll go up Iseiji a bit. And it was so cool. It was kind of everything I was looking for in a walk. So village to village, mountains, coastal. There's logging. There's like a mix of industry, logging, fishing industry. There were beautiful old inns. The food was incredible. So part of the problem with Kohechi, Nakahechi is there really aren't that many options for lodging.
No, there is.
It fills up fast.
Anything.
Yeah, sometimes you have to book a year in advance now because it's so popular.
I just took a tent. So I was just by myself going from camping spot to camping spot.
Yeah, so that's the other way to do it. The Iseiji has got lots of wonderful inns, onsen, all this. So it's pretty amazing. And the history feels to me really rich and kind of fun and active and alive. And there's still kind of a life to it that I find inspiring. And so the Iseiji just really captured my attention. I've been back. I've walked it maybe 6 times now, 7 times. And I keep going back and doing pieces of it. And other things started in Issei Shrine. And then I basically, this one I didn't walk because I had to cover so much so quickly. I rented a car, which felt kind of heretical. I was like, oh my God, I'm in a car.
Breaking the rules.
For art. But I was able to cover kind of a huge chunk of what I had walked before, to go back and say hello to these people and kind of pay respect to a lot of these personalities that had made so much of my other walks so beautiful and meaningful.
It is a very beautiful area, and you're trying to kind of convey this through your photography as well. Do you approach that the same way you do the writing, or what are you trying to kind of capture? Is it more like a documentary style that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, kind of in the mix of, someone like Alex Soth is probably a guiding light for me in contemporary photography, where you're just sort of out in the world with your camera. He uses large format, and he drives a lot, actually, for a lot of his books. He'll drive the Mississippi River looking for moments, spots that capture some kind of emotion or feeling of the time or not. A lot of what my photography has become has been like lightly anthropological, because so many of these places will be gone in 10 years. So the Kisa 10 are all disappearing. Even Kisa by Kisa half the kisas have shot.
Already?
Yeah.
And that was just a few years ago.
Just a few years ago. They're all disappearing. I did a huge Tohoku jazz kisa tour 2 years ago, and already 3 or 4 of those have shot. Just people are just dying. Everyone's old. It's the end of this era, the Showa era. So a lot of these shops were opened in the 60s or 70s. That was kind of the peak of opening a lot of these kisaten. And they're just aging out, and they don't want their kids to take over, because it's, they didn't start it out of glamour. It's like the kisaten people weren't like, oh my God, I love kisaten, let me be a kisaten person. It was like they kind of didn't have an option. So they opened their kisa, and that's what they've done for 40 years, 50 years. There's something really beautiful about that, because I think that kind of commitment to such a simple proprietorship is something that's more and more rare today. There's kind of a pull of social media and all this other stuff to kind of scale, to be bigger. How big can you go? So this idea of just running a small kind of community hub in the countryside is kind of, it's kind of against what I think drives a lot of young people today.
With your books being written in English and a lot of this being published internationally, do you feel like you need to add a lot of cultural context for people to kind of really get an understanding of the encounters you're having? If you live in Japan, I can picture when you talk about walking by the farm and this head pops up and looks at you, and then in disbelief looks, oh, a foreigner here, why?
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And these experiences are very touching. But when you're overseas, you may not have the full context of why is this such a rare occurrence? Why are these so surprised?
Yeah.
Do you need to explain that more, or do you feel this is not necessary?
Well, up until the Random House edition of this book, I felt like I was writing for super fans. So they kind of had a lot of context. So that gave me a lot of leeway of not having to explain things. So a lot of what we added to T-Bot Random House was, like I said, context. And in the end, I think it was a really great exercise. I'm really proud of where this landed and how it turned out, because, you can write for this kind of insider audience for so long, you forget about what it feels like to approach this work for the first time. So I think writing that context out was actually a really great exercise, and I'm happy with how it turned out. But yeah, you do need to know a little bit about Japan to be able to understand these things, because also, the way I've translated everybody in this book, I started walking the Key Peninsula when I started spending a lot of time in North Carolina. So my adoptive father divorced, my mom and dad divorced when I was like 2, and he sort of moved away to North Carolina. And so he was this sort of unknown figure in the woods of North Carolina, and he died in 2011. And I went to go bury him, and that created this relationship with North Carolina that was totally unexpected. And this friendship with a lawyer who was like 80 and super interesting. And I kept going back to North Carolina more and more and more to visit this old guy. And that was really fun. And I got really seduced by and kind of fell in love with the language in North Carolina. I mean, American English, by far and away, the most interesting version of it is down in the South. It's incredible. Okay. It's just the biggest mix. It's sort of very similar to Key. So when I started going to Key and hearing the Japanese, Kansai Ben is just so much more interesting than Kanto Ben, right? It's just there's so much more to it.
I can only agree.
You can only agree. You have to be crazy not to agree. I mean, when I'm deep in Key, and back in February when I was doing this book, and I was like spending a lot of time down near Kikatsuda and Kushimoto, which is like pretty deep peninsula. Like these are pretty inaccessible areas. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, the kind of sing-songiness of the Japanese I was hearing, and it was just infecting my Japanese, and I loved it. And I left, and I had to go to Yamaguchi right away, which basically has essentially Kanto style, like very katai Japanese, and for the most part. And I felt actually depressed going back to this kind of really like hard-edged Japanese, where everything was like super katai and like none of this playfulness up and down. And so Key to me and Southern American English have almost like this spiritual connection linguistically. So my translation of it is as North Carolinian English.
That's interesting from the English, the translation of the Japanese to English, but now you've also had the book translated into Japanese.
Well, no, this is Kisa by Kisa. Because it's Nakasendo, you never get that key energy of the language.
But the language you use to write your English for the whole book in general has been translated into Japanese.
Yes.
The stories you've told have been translated to Japanese. How did you approach that? Because
going backwards?
You're going backwards because you've written this in a very, I don't know what the right word would be to describe your writing, but I want to say poetic way. How does this translate into Japanese?
Yeah, well, I think doing T-bot back into Japanese will be more of a challenge. Kisa doesn't really, we're not quoting people that much. It's more just describing scenes and the energy of the scenes. The Bugen stuff, the Pizza Toast guy, I do quote, and he's been translated back into Japanese, and I hope he's okay with it. It's like, it's all pretty simple stuff. So it's not, and we're not like having deep political discussions. So it's not like, debating nationalism or anything like that.
Have you had the opportunity to now engage with a Japanese readership base and kind of share your stories with them and kind of talk about your experiences?
It's so fun. I'm so glad that we got this out in Japanese. We're actually already in the second edition. Oh. So the first edition sold out like in a month. We've done we did a big launch party in Morioka. We could talk a little bit Morioka, my connection there. That was amazing. The governor came and did aisatsu, and it was just this incredible thing to be able to talk about these routes, because Japanese people don't know the Nakasendo. No, when I walk these things, there's no one out there. This is also part of what draws me to these places. Like, overtourism really freaks me out and really makes me uncomfortable. And being a burden makes me incredibly uncomfortable. And so when I walk these areas, I don't feel like I'm imposing at all. And especially Tokaido Nakasendo, there's like nobody out there for days. And you'll see there's one of three types of people that will be walking these old routes. Either a retired old couple that are doing every weekend, they do like 2 days, and then they go home, and then they do 2 more days, and they go home, which I think you're missing out on the energy of the walk is because of its continued linearity. You don't take breaks, you don't get on trains, you commit to that linearity, and that's where in week 2, 3, that's when all the benefit starts to accrue. So I feel a little bad for them that they don't get that benefit. The other is like just retired, like guys who are probably single and just retired, like older Japanese guys, and they're just plowing through, and they've got the traditional, like
paper map,
Chikyu no Arukikata or whatever, like some map of the Nakasendo. So that's the other genre, and then the other genre is students that are on like spring break, and there'll be like 1 or 2 kind of wacky students, and they're just in pain and they're kind of frustrated, and kind of funny to see. So you don't see anyone out there for huge stretches. And so to be able to speak about the old routes with a certain amount of authority. I've walked them so many times now. I'm not purporting to be some anthropological kind of sensei or whatever, but like, look, this is what I've seen. I'm just reporting on what I've seen. And like when you walk the Tokaido and you walk between, say, Osaka and Nagoya, and you kind of come over the mountains into Mieiken, the vibe just changes completely. It is so bizarre to see. And you'd miss it in a car. You might miss it on a bike. But walking it socioeconomically, it drops off a cliff. Suddenly, you've gone from near Biwako and the surrounding area to one of relatively incredible wealth. And then you cross the mountains into Mie, and you get into this kind of industrial space. And all the signs are now in Portuguese, which is really interesting. And so you feel that these gradients of like sociological gradients and socioeconomic gradients that happen, that if you're not walking, you don't really internalize. And so to be able to talk about these things with a Japanese audience has been really exciting. And we did a book event in Nagoya, and a bunch of people came out for that. And like one guy was like, I read it 4 times already, and like asking really great questions about the translation. Because I worked with Imai-san, this guy Imai Eiichi is an amazing writer, translator. He's also just he writes for all these big magazines, does these huge pieces about Twin Peaks and Star Wars and all this stuff.
Twin Peaks is great.
Yeah, he's amazing. Imai-san totally gets my voice, and I love his translations. And so we do events together, and it's really fun to kind of talk about how we think about bringing this English back into Japanese.
Is this the first one that's being translated?
Yes.
So is this one next?
I hope so. We're working on it. Yeah.
I'm very curious about the reception of things become other things, because you mentioned that it kind of linked to a lot of personal episodes as well. When you talked with Rich Roll or Tim Ferriss, you talked about Brian a lot and about your adoption.
Yeah.
Have you had the opportunity to talk about those topics in Japan? Adoption in the West is something that is being discussed. People generally understand in Japan too, but I feel like I don't really see or hear about that, and it doesn't seem so common either.
It's a different...
Not that it is a common thing in the West, but...
No, but it is relatively common in the West. You hear about it quite frequently. And also cross-cultural adoptions, which is, its own bag of complexity. Korea, there's a lot of my friends parents adopted Korean kids in the 80s. And, that's just, there's a lot going on there.
That made the headlines recently, I think. The amount of Koreans that were adopted.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of messy things happening there. In Japan, adoption's more, as an adult, you get adopted by a family to kind of take over an inn. So when people say like, oh, this inn's been run by the Yamaguchis for 300 years, it's like, well, not really the Yamaguchis. It's like, maybe there's a Tanaka that kind of became a Yamaguchi, which people sort of don't understand. But also this idea of like unbroken blood is sort of a weird affectation too. I think that's like a fetish that the West imposes on some of these institutions. But yeah, so adoption, actually, the first time I wrote about meeting my mom, my birth mother, who I met last summer, was actually in the afterword of this book. Because I haven't written about it in English anywhere. It's still something I'm processing, but I thought, well, I can put it out in Japanese. And the Atogaki has had a really incredible reception, and going on Japanese radio and talking about it, and like the people in the booth like crying and stuff. It's been really interesting to talk about that story. And I get into it, super deep on, Rich Roll and Tim Ferriss. It's kind of its whole other, this universe of topic. But being able to talk about it in Japanese has been quite powerful. But just in general, being able to engage with Japan, fluently about these topics and thinking about these things, what's being lost, and having that conversation together with the Japanese public about these institutions has been really rewarding. And I'd love to do more of it.
So the way you talk with people is mostly in person. And you mentioned the book launch party in Morioka. We have to talk about Morioka because you brought it up twice.
Yeah.
It's a funny story. I'm going to let you tell it because I've heard it once before, but I have some follow-up questions to this.
Yeah, so...
Why is Morioka important?
It's a great... Morioka people want to know too. So like 3 years ago, the New York Times, who I sometimes write for, reached out to me, and they do this 52 places list every year. And they said, oh, do you have anywhere you want to recommend it? And I had just done a 10-city walking tour of mid-sized cities that quote unquote nobody goes to. Again, this impulse to like stay off the beaten path, to try to find new things, to not cause a burden. So I went to, Hakodate, Morioka, Sakata, Matsumoto, a bunch of great cities. And I walked 50K in each city. And in the middle of all that, Morioka was just amazing. It was just this incredible, beautiful city, Jokamachi, and, it used to be a castle town with great food, amazing coffee, lots of good scones. The people were super nice.
Is it part of Yamagata?
No, Iwate.
Iwate,
yeah. So it's, Shinkansen, you go up north, you get Sendai, and then, so it's Fukushima, Sendai, and then Morioka. It's like 30 minutes after Sendai. And no one had ever said Morioka's cool. I'd lived here by this point 23 years. No one had told me to go. I was like, this is crazy. This place is so interesting and beautiful. These two beautiful rivers, Nakatsugawa and another river, both meet in the middle of the city. Just good energy. Iwate-san is off in the distance. It's just a cool place. It's a great city. So New York Times is like, hey, do you have any recommendations for 52 cities? And it could have been anywhere in the world. It wasn't just Japan. I was like, well, yeah, Morioka was great. And I kind of wrote this impassioned, 200-word thing for it. And they don't tell you where it's going to appear on the list or if it's going to be in the list. And then the list comes out. And that year, number one was London for like the coronation, the king, and all this stuff. And then number two is Morioka. And everyone freaked out. I was like, what? How could this be number two after London?
I think I remember even seeing that list. I was like, oh, Morioka, maybe I should go.
Everyone was like, what? And then media found out that I could speak Japanese. And then it was just this inundation of, every newspaper, every TV show, every magazine, hunting me down. I was doing a big walk through Tokyo, and I was staying in like different hotels, and they would like come to my hotels at night with like this camera crew and like squish into my hotel room. And the mayor invited me up. They said, hey, come up and say hello. And so I was like, all right, great. I'll go meet the mayor. This will be interesting. So make sure everyone's okay. Because I felt really bad because my intent wasn't to put this much of a spotlight on the city. It was just to I thought they'd put it at number like 30 and people would be like, oh, it's interesting. Morioka's in there. Maybe 5 people would go. Number 2, and then media kind of having a bonanza around it changed the tenor of it all. And I thought I was going to meet the mayor. I was just going to say hi to this guy in the back room and that'd be it. And his handlers like come and get me, and they bring me in to this back hallway, and okay, he's in here, and they open the door, and it was like a room like this with lights and like 20 media people, and like everyone's got like a network camera and like rapid fire DSLR.
And you've got all the flashes going
off. Everything's. It was like I had either murdered someone or I was Brad Pitt. It was just insane. I was like, what is going on? And the mayor's kind of sitting in the back on like a throne, sort of like a stage in the back. And I go over there and he's like, oh, thank you, Moto-san. And, thank you for choosing our city. And then he's like, and good luck. And then he just left me. It's like, I know. They didn't tell me there was going to be media. They didn't tell me I was going to have to like give a speech. They didn't tell me anything. And I'm sitting there kind of slack-jawed and sort of in shock, in good humor, but in shock. And, there's a mic and all the journalists line up and the first person goes, Moto-san, thank you for picking Morioka. How do we solve poverty? Like, how do we solve poverty? That's your first question? I'm like, you guys, I'm sorry. You've got the wrong guy. I just like coffee. The scones are really good. I thought it was a beautiful, cityscape to walk. I do not know how to solve poverty. Also, you kind of have sort of figured it out for the most part. Like, you're doing pretty well on the poverty side of things. But it was just funny the kind of power that comes from the New York Times, which is, I think, what was driving a lot of this. All I did was point at a city. I didn't do anything. It's like, that's why there's almost no ego involved with any of this, because I didn't make anything. I just said, this is great, and wrote 200 words. Now, those 200 words ended up manifesting in all sorts of media, all sorts of other stuff. And the calculation is something like we've had $100 million of economic impact on the city.
$100 million.
Yeah. Which
Wow.
is sort of wild. So 200 words to $100 million of impact.
That's quite the ROI.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I don't think I'm going to beat that again. So, thankfully, and here's my thesis too of picking a city like Morioka. It's far enough away from Kyoto, from Shibuya, where the only people that are going to go are really going to be adventurous, good travelers. And I think with the overtourism, it's easy to get really depressed. Very easy to get really depressed. But if you look at the numbers of the 100% of these travelers, 90% of them are probably these kind of fair weather, TikToker, Instagram driven, not really, they're treating the country like a Disneyland, a playground. They aren't the kind of travelers you really want. They don't integrate with the locals. They don't know. They're there kind of selfishly for selfies and things like that. They go to Gion, they chase geisha. Like, probably 80 or 90% of the travelers that are coming fall into that cohort. This is just the reality of the world we live in, unfortunately, with social media and all this stuff. But that 10% is actually bigger than probably a year's worth of travelers 20 years ago. And that 10% is probably more engaged, more interested in studying the language, having a deep connection with the country than any traveler who'd ever come to Japan before. So there's a real opportunity to kind of, the 90% chaos over tourism traveler, to me feels like almost like a natural disaster. I don't know how to respond to it. I don't know how to think about it. If an earthquake happens, I'm not upset at the earthquake. I truly don't know what we're supposed to do.
It is frightening to look at Kyoto at the moment.
And New York Magazine just had this incredible piece come out about it, and it's damning. It's really just this terrible look at what's happening there. But the other 10% is this incredible opportunity for Japan to really highlight these places and bring those travelers who want to do deep, meaningful engagement with the country to these places like Morioka. So now when I go to Morioka, I go a few times a year, and I'll see obvious travelers on the street, or a lot of times I get recognized not by Moriokan people, although like when this all happened, it was bananas. Like, I'd walk down the street, people would stop their cars, Moto-san, thank you, like yelling out of their cars. Like, I'd walk into a cafe, everyone would stand up, start clapping, like everyone's buying me coffees. It was super, super bizarre. But now when I go, it's the foreigners who recognize me. I'll be in a cafe and some, a white guy will come over and be like, oh, are you Craig? Like, oh my God, yeah, I follow your blog or whatever. And I always ask them, like, what's your plan? Why are you here? And it's been incredible. The people that I've talked to are like, oh, we're here for a week in Morioka, and we just want to like be here, and we want to engage, and we're renting a car, and we're going to do 2 months of Tohoku. And I'm like, yes, this is like my dream. It's like Tohoku, if you look at the total tourism, it's like less than 1% of all inbound ends up in Tohoku. And like 99% of that's probably snowboarding. And so any number you can break off from the chaos areas, and especially you're just by default, you're going to get that 10% great kind of traveler, respectful, deep engagement traveler. They're going to be the ones that want to go and, okay, let's rent a car up in Tohoku. Let's go to Aomori. Let's go to Yamagata. Let's go to these different places. And to me, that is the absolute best possible outcome that could come from highlighting a city like Morioka. It self-selects for these kind of great travelers. And from what I've spoken to with the people who live up there, for the most part, it's been almost entirely positive.
So if today you were asked to write another recommendation for another city to bring some of these 10% of travelers to, which city would you
Well,
pick?
I've done 2 more. So I've had 2 more cities on the list. The next year was Yamaguchi City, which I went to walk the Hagioka, which is a pilgrimage route, or not a pilgrimage, but like kind of a mountain trade route, kind of highway, old highway between the Nihonkai and Seto Naikai, going through Yamaguchi Ken. And it goes Yamaguchi City to Hagi City. That's kind of the main. And it's a really wonderful walk today. It's like 2 days you can do it. It's about 50K. And you can stop right in the middle and stay at a nice ryokan. But Yamaguchi City is this amazing little city, and Yuta Onsen's amazing, village next to it, and you kind of put them together. And Hagi is a great city. So anyway, I recommend Yamaguchi City. That was number 3 on the list, the year after Morioka. And then this year, I recommended Toyama.
Nice.
Which was in part to help support Noto Hanto after the tsunami and the landslides. So to get people thinking about going in the direction of Noto. And most people know Kanazawa. And I like these kind of like flyover cities where like a lot of people will go through Toyama. The Shinkansen stops there for a second and then goes on to Kanazawa, and then they get off. I say spend a night in Toyama before you go to Kanazawa. So to kind of spread out. And already Kanazawa visitors are going to be self-selecting to be more interesting visitors than the average Gion visitor. And so to kind of, for me, it's like New York Times readers, if I recommend, say, something like not Izumi.
In Shimane?
In Shimane.
Yes.
Is it not Izumi Taisha?
I think Izumo.
Izumo Taisha, yeah.
I think so.
So you can recommend, like I've been to Izumoshi. I think, God, now we're having a...
Let's pull out the phone and check this before we say something wrong. We'll be there in a second. Because this is an important shrine, so we don't want to mess up.
I went up there to do iron smelting.
Izumo.
That's
shrine. Correct.
Yeah. Izumo shrine. So Izumo Taisha, Izumo City are interesting, and that area is kind of interesting, but it is incredibly difficult to get to. So I feel like if you're doing a New York Times recommendation, you want to do places that are just outside the beaten path, but still have infrastructure to access them. So Morioka, hop on the Shinkansen. Most people aren't going north, so that's already self-selecting, but you can get there. You can get to Morioka. You're there in 2.5 hours, easy peasy. You can walk around the city. You don't need a car. Yamaguchi City as well. Maybe you're in Hiroshima or you're going to Fukuoka. Add Yamaguchi on. That's very easy to do. And then same with Toyama, which is Shinkansen up north, Tohoku Shinkansen, and you go to Kanazawa and maybe add Toyama. But the Noto Peninsula, to get people in that direction and to help with them rebuilding and regenerating their tourism, which it really disappeared because Japanese people after Shinsai like that won't go because they think they're worried about imposing, or is it okay to stay? Is it being disrespectful? And I went and I did a day of driving all through the peninsula and talking with inn owners and restaurant owners. And everyone was like, yeah, we're still rebuilding, but please bring travelers, bring people. So again, that will self-select for some of the most interesting inbound tourists, I think.
Does that make you a kind of official ambassador of cities in Japan?
Completely reluctantly. There's definitely become this like, Kotoshi no Modo-san no ne, what's he going to pick? And everyone's kind of waiting in January.
It was a kohaku at the end of the year. What is Modo-san going to pick?
Exactly. And so I get, every day I'm getting, media requests from cities to come and visit and, we'll pay for this. I don't take any money. I don't do any of these media tours. I don't do any of that stuff. I also, look, I'm just traveling, and if I'm lucky enough to be able to write for a platform like the New York Times, I'm trying to use this as ethically as possible to spread out the goodness in as high return as possible. So like the Morioka returns, I think, are amazing. And Yamaguchi City, I think, has had a really good experience. I think Toyama's had a good experience. So I feel like we've turned it into this pretty positive thing. And I've had a lot of opportunities to speak to like Japanese ministries. So I've gone in and spoken with the tourism ministry and the inbound people who are kind of officials of inbound, and why are these cities interesting? What can they do to kind of make it easier for folks to travel to them? But also recognizing that I don't think over-tourism is going to take over any of these places because they are just onerous enough to get to. That someone who wants to get to Fushimi Inari and the Ginkakuji or whatever, and that's all they're interested in, they aren't going to take the time to go to Yamaguchi City. And the people who do are going to be these interesting travelers. And so I think it's, again, like I said, that 10% inbound of like the mega committed, respectful traveler it's an incredible opportunity for the tourism industry. And so I'm happy to talk to, for example, I think in September, I'm going speaking at Toyama at a symposium. In November, I'll be speaking in Morioka at a symposium. But these are, I don't take any money, and it's only when I'm able to speak to people at large, not to political parties. And again, it's just to say, I'm interviewed, I've been on like 100 TV shows and magazines and newspapers and stuff. And they're like, oh, Moto-san, what's your favorite soba? And I always, what I like to say is like, oh, my favorite soba is national health insurance. Because like, that's what allows all this to happen. It's like Book Nerd, the publisher of this book, is able to publish books like this and run their bookstore and have a family and have a good life because social infrastructure allows him to do that. Because this doesn't make that much money. Bookstore doesn't make that much money. But in aggregate, with sane social safety net in place, you can have all these independent businesses that make these mid-sized cities exciting, engaging, funky, authentic, all these, kind of words that you look for in somewhat cringe ways sometimes, but you look for when you travel. A place that hasn't been polished for a tourist, which, like you go to the markets in Kyoto now and they're selling like ninja spices or whatever. You're like, come on, you weren't selling ninja spices 20 years ago. But you go to Morioka and it's as it was, and you can see, like, the purpose of travel to me is not to take selfies. It's not to tick things off of Instagram lists. It's not to collect moments to share pridefully on social media. It's to have this opportunity to observe up close a culture that's different than your own and meditate on those differences and think about what inspires you and how you can bring that back to where you live and kind of do your own take on it. Not in a globalism sort of like smoothing out of all the culture of the world, but going, oh, this is really interesting. They do this differently. Can I integrate a piece of that into my own home culture or not? And I think cities like Morioka and Yamaguchi and Toyama enable that to happen far more readily than, say, Kyoto, which it's almost impossible to have an authentic experience.
You arrived in Japan at 19.
Yeah.
Started working in publishing and started writing books, walking. How has the success of those books kind of changed your life here?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a funny thing, is like, you're never going to be accepted as a person here, essentially. But all the media stuff established me as some, you're sort of almost ephemeral as a foreigner, as a non-Japanese presenting person here. And when you start to appear on TV, and like I made a TV show with Tamori-san last year.
Mm-hmm. So the famous comedian.
Super famous comedian. He's been on TV for like 50 years every day. He's like the great uncle of the whole country. I actually didn't know who he was. I've never watched TV here. I'm kind of sort of like very ignorant of a lot of pop culture in Japan. I've never been, obsessed with anime or manga or, J-pop or any of this stuff. So, and I've never owned a TV. So for better or for worse, I'm not connected. But you do a TV show with Tamori-san, and suddenly all of your neighbors, like all my neighbors in Kamakura, suddenly were like, "Oh, Moto-san, now I understand who you are." Like, "Oh, you're a real person." Like suddenly you've gone from ephemeral to like, a solid human. My Takyu being the Yamamotoka is like, "Oh, Moto-san, I saw you on TV last night." It's like suddenly you're a real, I don't know, you're contributing to the culture, you're participating. Celebrity grants you some kind of, I don't know, connection, I guess, in a way that helps Japanese people, where Japan is still very parochial about their thinking around outsiders, living here or making a life here or being full-time residents or even citizens. It allows them to kind of put you in a context that they understand and could possibly imagine you even paying tax here. I always love it when my Japanese friends are like, "You pay tax here?" I'm like, "Oh my God, I pay so much tax." And I'm so happy to pay tax here. And I'm honored to pay tax here because I see where it all goes, and I feel it when I go to Morioka or, in my daily life, everyone, people being taken care of. And that's great. But it does shock me that people think you are here, and I've been here for 25 years, as this like non-tax paying kind of person who at some point is going to go home. When are you going to go home? When are you going to go home? Those kind of micro slights are exhausting. Everyone who lives here who doesn't look explicitly Japanese experiences these things. And so the celebrity has grounded me in a way that I've never experienced before. And it made me, I'm not immune to this, but it made me feel good to feel slightly embraced by this place that I feel like I've given so much to, and I've also gotten so much from. But to feel even that little modicum of kind of, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you can hang here a little more. I mean, there's a little bit of a Stockholm syndrome thing happening too. It's like you're sort of, kind of like reaching for like the lowest hanging kind of sort of respect or whatever. But that was a nice carry on from that. And I think I've been able to transition the conversations into these bigger political conversations, which has also been exciting. And that's been fun. And same with talking about the book and things like that.
You mentioned that when you travel, what you like to do is to go to a place and observe how people do things differently and see what you can apply to your life.
Yeah.
Having been here now over 2 decades, what are the things from your life in Japan that you felt like, oh, this is something I want to take for myself and reinterpret? Well,
it kind of happens like osmotically, right? It's like you don't even know you're taking these things in, but like I'm very, very, very aware of how much noise I'm making in places, like when I'm in America or whatever, like what I'm imposing on the people around me. It was kind of shocking. I was on a plane, I just did the 6-week book tour in America for the Random House edition of this book. And I was on 10 flights, and I was all these cities all across America. And, I'm on this flight, and this guy in the seat across from me in the front row seat has got his foot up on the wall with his sneaker on. And I just remember, for the whole flight, he had his foot up on the wall. And I was just like, it was activating this, this red alert, don't you shouldn't be doing that. It was just kind of funny to feel that.
It makes you feel tense too. It's like nobody would do this here in Japan.
Like, oh my God, everyone's looking at the shoe, and or people putting their shoes on coffee tables, in hotel lobbies and things. You're just like, what are you doing? How can you do that? So I've internalized a lot of that. But I think what I've more applicable to my work is the shokunin culture here of, again, scale. Like we were just talking about, like social media perverts scale. Contemporary internet perverts scale. And you see this in overtourism. You see this in the way I think writers and film people and whatever engage with the universe or the work they're doing, where you think in terms of like, hundreds of millions of people. It's like if you don't have a billion subscribers, you're a failure or whatever. And I think the Japanese shokunin, so the craftspeople, are incredible because they don't really make any money. They commit their life to it. The apprenticeship, they'll do 10 years of an apprenticeship living in like a doghouse, like a master potter or whatever. And then finally they feel like they can go make their coffee cups. And I love that philosophy of the richness they're able to pull from life, of committing to that kind of work, of committing to the craft. And then also Japanese society is structured in a way to respect them in a way that I don't think American society is structured in a way to respect craftspeople. So you have things like ningen kokuho. So like Jiro, the sushi master, he got ningen kokuho before he got the Michelin stars. And I went and photographed him. And, it's really interesting. You'd expect, Living National Treasure is going to be this incredible, old Japanese, sushi restaurant thing. No, he's in the basement of Ginza, in this like really like windowless, really kind of like, this is where, the Living National Treasure does his work. But I love that. There's a kind of humbleness that I think I've tried to hopefully hold on to in the work I've done. This Random House book is the first time I've done something on a bigger scale because I think the themes I talk about in here about socioeconomic problems in America, how Japan handles things differently, my relationship, that story of my childhood friend Brian, I feel like that benefits from a bigger audience, and I'm happy to have this conversation on a bigger scale. But for me, fundamentally, the scale I'm doing my fine art books at and how I'm running my membership program, which is on a scale of like thousands to tens of thousands of things out in the world. Like my goal is 20 years from now, I'll put out maybe 100,000 copies of fine art books. That to me would be, or not even 100, like maybe we're going to hit 10,000 in probably the next year.
Which is really big for fine art books.
It's insane. It's bananas. A lot of editions are 500 or something. So, selling 10,000 copies of books like this is really, I feel lucky to be able to do that. But, hitting maybe 50,000 in 20 years or something like that. Because the more you produce, the more it kind of feeds into itself, and people buy older. They want to collect the whole thing. That to me would be such a win, and that scale to me feels really honest and uncompromising.
Is there something you want people to take away from those books when they read them, or is it up to everyone to kind of just make it their own?
No, I mean the only thing I'd ask is that you read them more than once, because they're kind of written and designed in a way to be engaged with multiple times, and things get uncovered and photos reveal different things.
The photos are beautiful. I really like the colors. Do you do a lot of treatment for them, or
Not really. I mean, I'm shooting with film now, so that you kind of just are getting this look based on that, but also developing for, I like matte paper and developing for these kind of printing processes. And, these are printed super high resolution on these Heidelberg presses. And so you kind of soften it a little bit to take the edge off from the digital on these super high res presses. But no, I'm really proud of where these have landed as objects, but also literarily, so much time is spent editing and rewriting. And this Random House edition too, I think is really its own special thing. The photos are in black and white, but I think they serve a different purpose than the fine art edition. And I really love the energy and the vibe that we landed on. And the editing of this book, the place we brought it to, all the extra context, I think is incredible. So please. Also, this is $25 shipped to your house. These are like $130 shipped.
I find it super interesting that it's the same book in different editions, but the new edition is not just a reprint. You rework it, you maybe change some photos, you add things.
Yeah.
The same story over again in a different way.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned you have 5 more that you want to write. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? What kind of stories do you have in mind? Are you going to go back to write about the Key Peninsula, or do you want to explore more beyond?
Hopefully I'm done with Key for a while. Like I've done a lot of Key. Like there's essentially 3 books on this table that are Key adjacent. I've done these other pop-ups, and I've written 30, 40, 50,000 words in these pop-ups. And yeah, there's a lot to do in those spaces. So, I've done my jazz Kisa Tohoku tour. I've done Tokaido, which I haven't written about. I want to do some stuff on Seto Naikai. I want to do 10 more cities and write about these different cities. I've got, 40,000 words about the 10 cities I've already gone to. So, there's just a sequence of things where it's just a matter of having time in the schedule to be able to produce these things. And I see it as, at least the next 10 years of work is sitting there to be done. And it'll change. As you do it, you'll discover other things. I did not expect Japanese edition to come out. I didn't expect Random House edition to happen. I didn't expect Morioka to happen. So you kind of improv jazz your way through.
Yeah, and suddenly like a few months of time are taken up by a new project, a side project, a side walk.
Side quest.
Yeah, side quest.
Yeah.
Greg, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
We talked about so many interesting things. I'm just trying to make sure that I didn't forget anything important, but maybe you had something else that you wanted to bring up that we really didn't get into.
Well, you had a nice question about, could you tell us, what would you say to your 19-year-old self? What advice would you give to your 19-year-old self stepping off the plane, arriving in Japan for the first time? And I thought that was a nice, maybe final question. 2 things. One would be, don't drink. That was a big mistake I made. I basically was straight edge all through high school to get out of my town, to make sure nothing could hold me back to get out of that town. So I was like optimizing everything. Like, how do I get out? How do I get out? And so alcohol, drugs, all that stuff is like, that was going to keep me there. So it was easy to say no to that. And then I got to Japan and it felt like this total reset of things. And I thought, okay, well, let me add alcohol to the mix. And it turns out that I found out through my biological connections that my birth father is an alcoholic. And very quickly I found out that I also have this propensity towards alcoholism. And I spent all of my 20s essentially battling this alcohol relationship. And so if I could have cut that out, that would have, I think, made so many things easier for me. And I really wish someone could have whispered to me, you don't have to drink. It's okay. You don't have to don't do the beer thing. Don't do the alcohol thing. Just say no. It's fine. It's very easy to do. So that would have been great. And then the other thing would have been hey, you can walk from Tokyo to Kyoto and there's these incredible routes. That was just not on the radar at all. So when I was 20, I hitchhiked from Tokyo to Fukuoka, and that was insane. And I was blacking out the whole way and waking up in houses I had no memory of getting to, and on floors, with just in my underwear, where am I, and opening the door. And it's some guy at a club had basically saved me and my friend from killing ourselves, because we were both so drunk and we didn't have a place to stay. And basically we slept on the living room floor of their mom's house. You wake up and you try to pee and you're in your underwear and it's a random mom. And anyway, it was just total chaos. And so the hunger for adventure was there as a 19, 20-year-old, but we didn't have a framework or any archetypes for how to do it in a healthy way. And I wish I had known about Nakasendo or Tokaido or the 88 temples, because we would have instantly gone and done that instead. That would have been a much more interesting adventure. So I wish I'd known about that.
Don't drink and go walk.
Pilgrimages, baby.
Yeah.
The answer to a lot of things.
Alcoholism, I think, is something we could have another long conversation about.
Yeah.
Maybe not today. I know that you've talked about it on other podcasts, so people can go maybe and listen to your story there.
Rich roll, and I get into it quite a bit.
But great advice for your 19-year-old self.
Yeah.
Pilgrimages.
Yeah.
Craig, thank you so much for coming, for making time in your full schedule of book tours to come talk to us and share your story. Talking about publishing, that was super interesting, and your extensive walks. I want to finish your books because I'm not done yet. So thank you very much for sending them to us. And hopefully we'll meet again for round 2.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.